With a Liverpool accent, probably. We're not, are we? So I just want to review some of the themes that Alan's brought out, because the media coverage on these issues to do with fat are so polar opposite to the scientific truth that I think if I say it in another way it may help convince you. Oh, perhaps not. So we tried this before, didn't we? Two mice fed an identical diet back in, I think, 1918. The only difference in the diet is the oil. 5% cotton oil on the left and butterfat on the right. Won't come as any surprise to you, but the issue is this is 1918, and we know that. Which we find this is a common outcome of some of these things. You've seen this one before, where the ants are preferring natural food in the bottom right there, which is butter, as opposed to your hydrogenated margarine and top there. Looks like there may be a couple of dead ones. And then to summarise the difference between the three, I like to call the three different fats. Rather than long words, saturated, unsaturated and so on, use the term reactivity, because that's what matters inside your body. If you're ingesting something that's highly reactive, things happen inside your biochemistry, and if your body doesn't like some of those things, it reacts to it and creates the inflammation. If those things are happening on a daily basis, then over the decades, that inflammation becomes chronic and has permanent effects. One of which that Alan mentioned was the fact that fat is vital to cover your nervous transmission points. It coats the nerves all over your body, and if you get failure in the insulation, the fat, the breakdown, that causes errors in transmission of your electrical signaling, and implicated in diseases of dementia, for an example. So in the case of saturated, I would call saturated fat non-reactive fat. Monounsaturated is slightly reactive, and poly is very reactive. Now, there's a key point on there. It says that all of these fats, whether it's tallow, coconut, lard, and butter, they do have a proportion of polyunsaturated and monounsaturated aspects to them. So you can't get away from it completely. But the polyunsaturated vegetable oil that Alan's been talking about is full of the stuff, and you don't want to go anywhere near it. So I just wanted to make those points from that angle.
So you're saying most of the oils in the supermarkets are no.
If it's liquid, you want to steer clear of it. The issue with olive oil, which is the best one of them all, is that there's a lot of fraud in the olive oil business, and I should add that we've contrary to what the media would let you believe, we've only really been consuming olive oil anyway for about 100 years. It doesn't go back a long time in Italy, for an example, in the usage of it. So mass usage only in the last century. So just to, you've seen this slide before, but I think I haven't heard what Alan's had to say. I think you've got much more science behind you now to understand the statements on here. The bottom line is that you don't want to get yourself inflamed, because the top three on there are your brain, your heart, and cancer. And in fact, about the only thing that isn't on that list are your bones. And I can't think of a problem with bones, but there probably is one. Now, this is one of my favourite researchers, Nina. I won't pronounce her surname because I can't. She wrote a book in 2014 called The Big Fat Surprise, and she was the start of the realisation of what was going on in the food industry with fats. And if you look at the bottom right here, we've that chart, you probably can't read it. It goes from 1909 into 2000 or so. Yeah, nearly enough 2000. And it's showing you the sales of vegetable oils. And you've got, don't know if you recognise the guy in the photograph, but Nina always likes to pin Ike Eisenhower. He had a fairly severe heart attack in 1955, 2.5 years into his presidency, which took him out the White House for 10 days. And it got a lot of press coverage. And the food industry used that to emphasise the fact that the healthy vegetable oil is a good line to go. And of course his problem was mainly 80 cigarettes per day. And equally, you see Alan briefly touched on Crisco, which was the margarine. In the top left you can see the sale of butter, lard and tallow dropping off a cliff, more or less. And the industry very keen to jump on public events like Eisenhower's heart attacks to promote any money-making operation. There's the book from Nina, exposing the food industry's lies about fat. I'm not embarrassed to show this chart again, and you've only just seen it. It's because it's jaw-dropping, quite literally jaw-dropping. This is a global meta-analysis of all the research on the association between saturated fat and unsaturated fat with heart disease mortality. You couldn't get it more obvious, but it's not public knowledge. And this is another slide thanks to Nina. Basically saying there's been a huge number of pieces of research covering over 75,000 people, men and women, by the way. A lot of research is men only. Some of these were running for as long as 12 years to try and find any association between mortality and saturated fats. There isn't any, and Alan's blank slide says it all. On the theme of we knew a long time ago, you've seen a similar document I put up on the topic of understanding how to deal with diabetes. And that document was about 1893, so I thought I'd use a different one. This one is 1923, as you can see, and the bottom line should say, in fact it does say, the diet restricts a diabetic to 10 grams of carbohydrate, and that overcomes the disease. It wasn't until 1921 that they discovered insulin, and sometime later when they were able to synthesize it, when of course the industry, in this case pharmaceutical industry, found a sales opportunity. So what can we conclude? I think we've established that it isn't food. Seed oils are not food. And the danger to us is that they're extremely reactive because they're polyunsaturated chemistry. And of course, it was only in 1911 that Procter & Gamble brought out Crisco, which popularised the use of margarine. And you see some of the sales charts earlier, courtesy of Nina. In the case of saturated fats, what do we know? We know that they're stable, they're not very reactive, and essential for human life. Okay, so that was just a quick summary of Alan's presentation, key points that I wanted to bring across from a different angle, to show you the completely solid, and I use that term, solid evidence that saturated fats, which are all solid, with the exception of margarine, which we all know about. I just wanted to eke those points out. So we go back, so that was the known knowns, if you like. We're now into back into our favoured position, which is the unknown unknowns. You've seen these books before, and you see Nina's on the left there, a different edition of it. Paperback, no doubt. Anybody managed to see the podcast on the right there, How They Made Us Doubt Everything? It's a BBC podcast, it's on BBC Sounds. I think it's about 8 episodes. Well worth listening to. And we're going to go into a quite tricky area now, because I want to explain how we've been fooled for all of our lives with the marketing and the public relations activity of industry. And I think Einstein's got it right there. We just see the reality that is presented to us. And the way to journey through it is to challenge the establishment, because we're getting quite a bit of this fake information presented as fact. I think you all know Professor Tim Spector. He runs the Zoe. Actually, many of you perhaps are members of the Zoe. He's running internet-based epidemiological studies to do with, I've written them down there I think, COVID, blood pressure, and his latest one is poo. The largest...
Food for life.
Pardon?
Food for life is his latest book.
Oh yes, it is, you're right, yeah. This is the one, this is 5 years old, this one. I put this one up because of what it says on the front. And that's the whole purpose of this slide is, it's not just Alan and me, the other 5 guest presenters you've had, telling you these things. It's the knowledge is getting out there. So let's quick check to see where we are today. We look at Pepsi, now got a new logo. We're entering into the segment of the course which I call More Science, Less Fiction. It's based on the fact that when you walk in the library, overwhelmingly there are more books on fiction than there are on non-fiction. And we find the same tableau in the health industry. It seems there's more fiction out there than the science. So we're trying to rebalance our own library. You've seen some of the books already. But that requires us to make a paradigm shift. And I don't know how long, well, we haven't got much time left, but I have to provide a substantial amount of evidence to you in order to convince you of how we came about where we are today. And that will mean I've got a number of direct quotes from people that I'm going to need to read out verbatim. So we're going to have a slightly different day, both probably not today now, but when we get into this presentation, it's going to be a lot more interactive than my previous ones. And that's principally because the purpose of this course is that once you walk out the door at the end of the course, you have sufficient confidence in your knowledge on these matters that you can have an adult conversation with friends and family about these kind of things and not feel that you don't understand it sufficiently to answer the questions or the challenges of your friends and family. So I'm very happy for people to ask me questions about this because I don't want you going out there thinking that you're against everybody else. And so anytime you feel you've got a question, it's not your fault you've got the question. It's my fault. So you need to answer it, ask it, I should say. And because of that, I don't know how long my presentation will take. It's a question of how many questions you've got. We're going to go back into, in order to explain how we got to where we are today, we're going to look back in history. And that history is going to largely be from North America because most of the time that's where the public relations, the marketing, the sales, the concepts are developed over there. And migration over to Europe and the rest of the world is in the following decade. And we won't be just confining ourselves to food, we'll be looking at other things that impact your health. You'll hopefully find some surprises along the way. It's quite a long road to take. And we're going to start off with this. This is a quote from a chap called Kobe. It's very popular on the internet. What it's basically saying is belief, the concept of belief, is merely a statement of how you view the current situation, your world, your culture. This is what it looks like to you, therefore it's your belief. We have values, and there are things that you want to supplant your belief with those values. So you want to change your values into your beliefs. And that's what we're going to need to do on the remainder of this course, to convince you of how we've arrived at the position where, take saturated fat as an example. How has it come about that we think the complete opposite to the science? And in fact, it's on every packet of food that you buy. It says on the packet in the ingredients list, fats of which saturated fats. It's my bell saying stop talking, Jim. Can't persuade her though. Technology, eh? So I'm going to keep going. Where was I? Yeah, so you've got one of the reasons you still believe that, you probably still believe, despite our presentations today, can't be all wrong. Saturated fats can't be that good. And one of the reasons is it's on the package of every food packet that you pick up. So, what are we going to cover in the rest of this course? So this isn't for today. We have to acknowledge there's a facade, and one of the facades I've just detailed about the packets of which saturated fats. So we'll have time to look at some of these myths, and we'll give an example of how they create sales opportunities later. Well, not today. And later on we'll begin to understand why this has happened and how big the situation is. And then we're going to delve into the industries that are involved and how they're controlling matters, the mechanisms that they use. And then we look at how your belief system works in your brain and how your brain's connected to your digestion by the vagus nerve and how you're not aware of the role of the vagus nerve, let's say, in your biochemical processes. So there's a lot of things going on inside your own biology that is used by industry to sell you more products, and that's part of what I'll be explaining as the course goes on. This is hopefully a surprise for you, but what it's basically saying is that Georgia Edie, who is a nutritional psychiatrist, she has a lecture on YouTube, and it's called Brainwashed: The Mainstreaming of Nutritional Mythology, the idea that there's a lot of untruths out there. And she's inspected the American Food Guidelines. She's looked at a project run by Lancet called EAT and its recommendations, and also WHO, the World Health Authority, whatever it's called. Organisation. And the outcome is that you should always start from a position of extreme skepticism, because most of nutrition science is really not worth the paper it's printed on. Now that's a pretty shocking thing to see. I think it's pretty recent, isn't it? 2020. But that's a YouTube video, and we're going to delve into a little bit of that in the time we have remaining. And here's an example from the British Medical Journal, questioning how the funding works for medical authorization organisations, one of which runs in this country. So the first one you may have heard of, the MHRA. It's the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. It's funded 86% by industry donations and fees. Now, if I went through every one on there and I began to highlight them to make it easier for you to read, but there's so much on there where basically virtually every country, so Japan at the bottom, Australia as you're coming up, the US, Canada. Canada's the best one, by the way. Just over 50% of its funding for medicine regulation is from the pharmaceutical industry. But virtually all the other ones are more or less 100% funded from the agency that they're regulating. Now, as we go through, we find this is a very common, in many other industries, a very common circumstance, which is a bit of a concern. Let's look at it, how it happens in the charity sector. Alan mentioned American Heart Association. Started in 1924 by about a dozen cardiologists with funding from Procter and Gamble. You remember Procter and Gamble, the creators of Crisco in 1911? So they funded the American Heart Association. I'm not saying they're funding them today. There's a little reminder. So on the left is the shortening for your baking, and on the right is for your chips. And I'm going to read some of these to you in case you can't see it. Mayo Clinic Minutes, 5 tips for cooking with healthier oils. Harvard Health Publishing, no need to avoid healthy omega-6 fats. Unsaturated fat, best for heart. American Heart Association, healthy cooking oils. Now there's something else on here that we're not going to touch on today, is Tufts. Tufts is a university, and in collaboration with somebody, probably the American Heart Association, they've developed something called the food compass. But if I get time, I've got an example later. Bottom line is, there's a lot of these collaborations between universities and industry to change the metrics about the products in that industry. So I'll run around here and highlight the ones I read out just before. And you probably can't see that one at all because I converted it. In 2018, the American Heart Association received more than 28 million in corporate donations from major drug companies. So that's just one I picked to give you an example. Now, Alan mentioned the diet comparison that the American Heart Association did on DASH. I think it's called DASH. It is called DASH. And he pointed out that it was just on a list of things that they thought was more or less a good idea for you. The traditional established view of what's supposedly good for heart health, which we know now is based on no science. And so they compared 10 diets and surprise, surprise, scored them out of 100. This was in the Daily Mail about 5 days ago. Scored them out of 100, their own diet scored 100. And keto, don't know whether my pointy thing might work. There you go. Keto finished last. Scored 31. That's largely because keto recommends saturated fat. So, what can we conclude about regulation? Well, it seems like there's money involved, and it's not difficult to purchase influence, and we'll make some deep dives next month into these topics and give you some more examples. And I'll probably stop there. No, I won't. Right, yeah, I'm going to run through this pretty quick because you know all about carrots, pilots in the Second World War, planes that could carry radars. At first, the Germans didn't have it at the time in 1940. So our kill rate went through the roof. And in order to stop any suspicion from the Germans about a secret weapon that we might have, we put the myth out that if you eat carrots, you see better at night, so all our pilots are eating carrots. Now, I don't know when that got revealed to us, but I think it was after 1980 or so, as a myth. So what I'm saying is it's not difficult to perpetuate a myth, especially if you're in control of the communications. So I've selected, I'm not going to show you that now. When we start next month, I've got 21 myths that I've picked 5 examples out to explain why they're a myth, make a deep dive into them, understand the history of how it happened and so on. So I've picked out 5, but what I actually want to do, if you agree, is to go through the 16 as well, because I want you to be armed when you go out into the big wide world. If somebody comes up with one of these myths, you'll be able to explain it away. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions? Good. So we've got some good news. Not sure what the noise is. Brilliant. The good news is that Graham Phillips, do you remember who he is?
The pharmacist.
The pharmacist chap has offered to come back and talk to you all about blood tests I asked them specifically to address the interpretation of your blood tests. So you're probably all familiar with the full blood count blood test, but we want to go through the kidney results and the liver results and anything else he wants to throw in the pot, and something also called CAC, calcium artery scanning or something. Forgotten what it's called. Anyway, it's a process of looking to see what deposits you've got in your cardiac arteries to see what your risk is. It's a well-established scan. It's about £300. But I want him to explain these things in such a way that you're able to interpret the results which you may have received by, it's July the 4th is coming. So if you order a blood test before then, you can have your own information around. Who knows, you could grab them after the event to talk on individual stuff. But basically, if you get a blood test between now and then, any questions you've got left, you will explain on July the 4th.
Can I ask a question, Jim?
You always do, Precious.
Do many people in the audience ask for copies of the blood tests from the doctors?
Any hands of people who bring the... Yeah. We've got two pieces of advice with attending a GP appointment. First one is to bring somebody else with you, because if you're sick, you're not working properly, you're not necessarily taking it in, and that's somebody who can remind you to say what you wanted to say, or more especially remember what the GP said. Anyway, and secondly, any material to do with you, I strongly advise you to get them to print it and bring it out either all the time. Multi-page blood test results and so on.
It's not least because records go missing.
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
No, I mean. Yeah. So I had a feeling there was something else I wanted to tell you.
Thing is, though, we don't want everybody bringing blood tests to show.
You don't need to show it to them, but you've got to hear. You can follow it. You've got something to follow, and it will generate a question. We're trying to do a sizable education process, and we want you to take ownership of your own health for reasons we explained at the start of the course, which is primarily, as you're seeing, the NHS is gradually disappearing, so you'll be left on your own.
Yeah.
And, your family, younger members of your family. So this is essential education as far as we're concerned. So, anyway, I think, unless somebody wants to remind me of something I've forgotten.
Yeah, well, can you just mention about Pam and the support group? Or does Pam want to say anything about it?
No, I'll talk about Pam. She's perfectly happy.
Does everybody know what Pam's suggesting?
That they've all got the information. So, it just remains for me to say thanks to our roadie, young Chris, who's somewhere around. Where is he? Oh, there he is. He's on semaphore duty. Sterling job. And what else? The chair. Oh, and of course. And if you could, we need the chairs up on the stage, but we only need 3 or 4 people to do that. So to give us a hand with that. And if there's nothing else, I'll see you next month. What was the noise? It seemed good phone, but I don't know. No, I turned it off. I heard it outside, but I couldn't. No, I couldn't. No. You don't listen to it. I'm on my phone. Doesn't matter.
Martin would have